The Foamstars beta came out last weekend and I had to try it. Problem is I didn't have a PlayStation 5, so I did what any reasonable person would do and I spent $500 on a PlayStation 5 to play the Foamstars beta. So yeah, let's talk about it. There were a couple of live events that different kind of reporters and game journalists that were able to get their hands on the game, and for the most part were actually pretty positive. That instilled enough hope in me and enough FOMO, to convince myself to go ahead and purchase the PS5. Whether it is going to be a dumpster fire or whether it's going to be the next great game, I need to be a part of that. I need to experience whatever it is that is going to be. So there's kind of two tales to my experience, my overall impressions on the game. Early impressions that were kind of lukewarm, and then as I kept playing the game, my impressions got better and better and better. At this point, I love this game. When you foam the floor on Foamstars at the very beginning, it felt like it didn't work sometimes. It felt very off. Same thing with the movement. The movement felt off because I'm so used to a lot of the very high level mechanics of Splatoon. There's a very nice fluid rhythm, you know, using the different mechanics specifically in Splatoon, and Foamstars just didn't really have that. The other thing that led to some early frustrations was the reload mechanic, because there's a lot of animations, I would say, that they added into Foamstars. Early on, it did not feel good because I was constantly reloading in team fights. I would lose a lot of fights because I would be shooting at someone and then I would run out of liquid and I would just start reloading in the middle of the fight. So when you're reloading, you're just a very easy target. The other thing early on that felt weird about the game was that things felt very chaotic. There was a lot of bubbles just everywhere. There were just things happening all over and I didn't have a clue what was happening. As I kept playing through the game, things felt less and less chaotic once you started understanding where each of these bubbles were coming from and these different abilities that are just being thrown around the map and you're having to dodge things left and right. Over time, you kind of start to figure out who's using what abilities, whose weapons work in what way. And once you can start figuring this out, things definitely feel a little bit more controlled and calculated. So I think the big turning point with this game of when it went from this, oh, it's not Splatoon, to this thing's kind of interesting and oh man, I'm having a really good time, it started happening when I just finally accepted that this is its own game. And once you accept the game for what it is, you can think about each of these little pain points that I talked about when it came to foaming the map, when it came to movement, when it comes to that reload mechanic and some of the animations in the game. When you accept it for what it is, you can start looking at how to use that to your advantage, how to play in a way to not let those negatives be a hindrance, and actually how to punish other people for making mistakes. And once I had that switch in mentality within myself, the game just opened up and became this wonderful, wonderful, wonderful experience. So now I want to talk about how the game feels overall and just like the general gameplay, like the flow of the game. I'll be making a lot of comparisons to other games, and as you'll notice, Splatoon is only briefly going to be mentioned because I don't think this game feels like Splatoon really at all. Obviously, they yoinked the turf mechanic and kind of made it their own, and I would love for other games to do that as well. I think this could be a giant genre of having these turf-based shooters. I will make a lot of Splatoon comparisons because I'm a competitive Splatoon player. A lot of my audience is probably also has a Splatoon background, so making those comparisons is a nice way to like make some parallels. But this game does not play at all like Splatoon, for better or worse. You know, it really depends on like what you're looking for in the game, and we'll talk through it. The other big thing, which I didn't think about until afterwards when I started doing some more digging about the game, but the developers of Foamstars, it was like the same team that worked on the Nier series, like Nier Automata. I didn't think about it while I was playing, but a lot of times I would consider like when I was taking team fights and stuff, like when there's just like a lot of abilities that are being shot out, it felt like I was in like a shoot 'em up or like a bullet hell kind of game where you're just like, you're constantly having to like navigate around a lot of different abilities and stuff, and I couldn't really put my finger on like why it felt that way. But the second that I read that this game was developed by the Nier team, the Nier inspiration, especially when it comes to the projectiles of this game, the patterns, like one of Melty's abilities, they have like a unicorn that comes out and it just spits out a bunch of projectiles. It looks like a Nier boss. The inspiration is very apparent and very obvious once you know that fact. Having to dodge everything while moving around and still do whatever it is you're trying to do, it feels very rewarding, and it's a very unique experience for a shooting game. It is a very uniquely Foamstars feel in terms of like multiplayer shooters that is inspired from a lot of the single player kind of boss battles that you get in Nier Automata. And it feels so nice. It makes the game feel very like epic. It was like this melding of two genres that I didn't know that I wanted. This game, as an ability shooter, it's very easy to compare it to Overwatch in a lot of respects. It feels like Overwatch in that team fighting aspect where you're really working with your teammates and you're going in with very specific abilities. Each player has their own role when it comes to the fight itself, and the more cohesive a team can be with the timing and the layering of the abilities can like swing and dictate the way that the fight ends up happening. That team fight aspect as well, it gave a lot of Gears of War vibes. I don't know how many people have played Gears of War that would watch this video, but I played a lot of Gears of War back on the Xbox 360, and that kind of slow, methodical, slowly pushing for small advantages and real like hardcore, heavily working with your team. It felt very nice, kind of going from cover to cover, especially in the late game when there's a lot more cover that's built up in areas. It has a very Gears of War vibe. I think this game, like, it has a little bit of a Fortnite look to it, at least in the initial trailer and everything. Like in Fortnite, I know that you can build like to the skies and stuff, and people are like super high in the air. It's not nearly on that scale, but being able to take cover behind the stuff that you've built, and the enemy team, you know, if you're taking cover behind your own foam, having the enemy team just destroy your foam with their own abilities and stuff, it had that destruction kind of feel. If you are a fan of Fortnite, like if you like the idea of it, but you don't like actually, you know, having to construct these giant like towers in the sky in the middle of a team fight and everything, I think Foamstars might actually resonate with you quite a bit. It's more using your brain. It's a matter of like shooting out your ability. It's not like you have to have like 50 different actions every second in order to, you know, build up these giant structures and everything. So when we start looking at the mechanics of this game, I'll start with the movement. I think the movement in this game feels very nice. It feels very free, and especially once you're on your own foam and are moving around the map, you can very quickly turn and kind of maneuver yourself and dodge a lot of things or navigate to wherever it is you're trying to go with a lot of ease. In Splatoon, like I said, you have to manage your momentum quite a bit, and there's a lot of very in-depth mechanics when it comes to main strafing, sub-strafing, squid rolling in 3, but it is very demanding and highly mechanical. This feels a little bit more accommodating, and you don't have to think about movement too hard. It just kind of works, which I thought was quite nice. But, you know, neither one of those movement options are bad, but I think in general, it feels good. The flow between foaming the ground, using your surfboard to go through that foam the ground again, go back in, it felt very seamless and it works very well. Especially in this game, there is a lot of dodging of enemy patterns with their abilities, with the different bullets that they have on their weapons. There's a lot of things that you have to navigate around. This game feels quite good. When we start looking at the specials, the interesting thing, and I think one of the biggest differences between Foamstars and a game like Splatoon, is the way that your special gauge works and how it gets rewarded. So in Splatoon, you get rewarded by turfing the ground, and the more that you paint around the map, that's how you build your special. In Foamstars, you get rewarded for chilling the enemy. When you get picks, and I think once you get a pick, you get about like 20% of your special gauge. So if you're really good at the game, you'll get your special quite often. Especially when you go through and get like a double or a triple, and you pull off a really nice flank. You can go from just using your special to like having your special again. In Splatoon, your main weapon is your main way of foaming the map and getting turf control that you're looking for, getting paint down on the ground. In Foamstars, and usually I think it's generally Baristador and Rave Breaker, the two characters that have the like foam, the hose kind of spray and not the actual bubbles, they can foam with their main weapon pretty well. But I would say for the majority of the cast, foaming with your main weapon is a very inefficient and painful way to get foam on the map. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It definitely is good, but over time, especially when these big piles of foam start building, you will literally take forever to try to lower the enemy's giant foam wall that they've created and start building up your own. So it's a waste of time, and if you don't understand that, you're gonna probably get pretty frustrated. Your abilities in this game are the core way that you get a lot of foam down at once. So if you need to move around, if there's a giant wall that's kind of in your way, a lot of times you're going to want to use your abilities to either navigate around that foam or use your abilities to destroy the little foam structures that the enemy team has created or build up your own. And that subtle shift really matters. On the more flat surfaces where there isn't a lot of foam, your main weapon will do just fine. So people that would spend the beginning of the match to kind of sit around their base and slowly push forward and try to turf the map and foam the map, they were getting punished all the time because it's a very inefficient use of your time to try to generally paint the map. The other thing that's really nice about this game, because neither of these games have an auto aim, like there's no auto aim or like no magnetism, and you don't get any of the nice auto aim features that a lot of console shooters use. I think motion is definitely the way to go when you're playing this game. When it worked, it felt really nice. And between the way that this controller, the PS5 controller, is such an upgrade, so nice. I love it so much. Motion on the PS5 controller feels very good, but I don't know if it's the way that this game is coded, but it would like break quite a bit. There is a reset button, so if you click in the right stick on the PS5 controller, it will reset. It's similar to pressing the Y button when you're playing Splatoon, and it like resets and like recenters your motion. You can do the same thing in this game, and every time that I recentered it fixed the problem, and like I was back in it. 85 to 90% of the time, the motion was like flawless. It was wonderful. I also tried this on 2 separate controllers. I ended up buying a second controller to play with my wife, and just PS5 in general. And the same thing happened on both controllers. So it's either the way that the gyro functions on PlayStation 5 in general, or maybe the way that it was coded for this game specifically. Overall, I'm super excited that they added the gyro and the motion controls. They didn't talk about it at all with any of their coverage that I had seen. So I went into the beta not even knowing if it would be there. So I was pleasantly surprised. I would recommend anyone that plays the game to play with the gyro aim. And a few things that they need to work on, but for the most part it functions, and it functions very, very, very well. Another thing with the mechanics of this game is that each character has their main weapon. There were a couple of characters that had 2 firing modes with their weapon. When I make my character guides, I'll go more in depth with that. But yeah, so you have your main weapon, and then you had 2 abilities. You had 2 separate abilities, and then you had your special. One thing I thought that was really neat, each character has their own unique, I think they're called like bubble beasties. But you get this little like blob character that's kind of like your companion, and that bubble beastie is represented in at least one of your abilities. I think it's your whatever R1 was. I think it was your ability 2. So one of your abilities got represented with the Bubble Beastie, and your special involved that Bubble Beastie, which I thought was a nice little flavor theme. But you have 2 separate specials. The important thing to know about these abilities is that they don't use any of your liquid. They don't use any of your ink tank or foam tank. I'm just gonna call it liquid. But that all gets managed with just cooldowns, because in Splatoon, your sub weapon, like whatever bomb or mine or sensor, some utility that you had in that game, could take up, when you use one of them, it could take up anywhere between like 50% to like 80% of your overall ink tank. And in this game, those are just represented with cooldowns. And because of that, this game gets a lot faster and you can do a lot more things when you're like actually fighting. I like the way that they handled that. I think in Splatoon, it makes sense for the sub weapons to be integrated into your ink tank. But for this game, I think having separate abilities really just functions very nicely. Those abilities help with your foaming, but they're also very powerful tools that are significant. They're like abilities in Overwatch. Those abilities can make or break how your character functions and can be like your main damage source in certain cases. It can be your main setup source in cases. So getting the most value out of those abilities is super, super important. And as I mentioned, you have a special ability, I think it's called like a superstar skill in this game. Knowing the right time when to use them is a big kind of skill testing measure in this game, which is very common for a lot of ability-based shooters. All right, next I'm going to talk about the characters and kind of just like the overall like character design and how that kind of implements within the gameplay a little bit. One thing that I will mention just at the top of it, it's just a totally side fact, but when I was kind of walking my dogs, I was like thinking about this game a little bit in retrospect, and with all of the foam and everything, that parallel between, especially when it comes to the 3D aspect of it, of piling up the foam, and it felt very much to me like you're piling up snow and everything. It brought me back to my childhood in a way that I really appreciate. I don't know if that was like done deliberately on their part or anything, but it's something that was oddly special to me kind of when looking at this game. So yeah, I thought I'd bring it up. I don't know if that resonates with anyone, but yeah. So I have some of the characters up here, and I'm generally looking at them. So when I look at the characters like Soa, Agito, and Penguin, they are like your typical like shooter aggressive playstyle. They go about it in very different ways. Soa's probably the most mobile. They suffer a little bit from not being able to paint quite as well around the map, but they can navigate over paint, especially enemy paint, and they can like dive the enemy very, very well. Agito is someone, and they're like represented as a shark as an example, and they have like a very high power, low range weapon where, you know, like a shark, they need to get in and get up close in order to get their chills and to do a lot of damage. And that whole theming is like very well thought out. And then when we look at like Penny and Penguin, you know, seeing your little penguin just like on its belly, just like going through the snow, it reminded me of like Super Mario 64 a little bit with a lot of the penguins in those games. But you know, it feels very much on brand. If you want to be the person with very high chill counts at the end of the game and have very nice KDAs, those are your characters to choose. For characters like Tonix and Jet Justice, and I would probably say Wravebreaker as well, but they also kind of go into this last category. But I would say those three are more like your support type of characters, but they work in very unique ways. Wravebreaker is someone that can lay down paint very well. They're there to like not let foam go out of control against you. And over time, they can build up this very nice foam differential and can start, you know, they can be aggressive. They can do a lot of damage, but they can also support the team very well. So they're in like this more defensive support type of role, whereas Jet Justice is like an engage type of character where they need their team to be with them, but they can initiate those fights. They can go in from a far distance, they can jump in, engage the enemy, build up this little fortification wherever they jump in, and you know, can be very aggressive, but if they're going in by themselves, they're also very vulnerable. And then Tonix is someone that their abilities, they have like a turret that can help kind of build up a lot of snow, and it can also work. They're one of these characters that they kind of swing from offense to defense like very well. Like I'd say Jet Justice is very offensively focused, Ravebreaker is very defensively focused, and then Tonix is someone that can kind of flip on a dime. And they're also one of the characters that have the two, well, Jet Justice does as well, but they have like 2 different firing modes. And then the last 2 characters, which they're on quite different sides of the spectrum, but Mel T and the Barista, I'm just gonna call them the Barista, they are your backline kind of weapons. And I mean that in the fact that they provide a lot of defensive like fortification. Like I was talking about when I played against a very good Barista, they can build up. I mean, one of their abilities is literally building up like a giant wall. It's like a splash wall in Splatoon, but just the way that the foam mechanic works, it plays out very differently in this game. But effectively, that's kind of what it looks like. But you build up these giant foam walls, and but like the Barista's hose and their other ability, like they can just build up paint very well. Melty's probably the most misunderstood character of the cast. They felt very weak when playing as them, but I think they're a very highly technical character. I just built up like this giant fortress of paint. It takes time to build it, but when the enemy was trying to escape versus one side or the other, I could just like use my abilities and just like fortify that side of the map. And they would like, we slowly like push the enemy team back into their spawn. It worked out really well. If you try to go in with them like their Soa or like their Penny or Agito as like this aggressive character, like you're just gonna struggle. Their character, they don't work well like that. But one thing I will say is that all these characters like move around pretty well. In a game like Splatoon, fortifying characters, like the defensive type characters, are a little bit slower moving, and they have a hard time kind of getting around, but that is not the case in this game. All characters can move around very well, especially Barista. I think I'll get into like tier lists and stuff in future videos. I think this character is either A tier or S tier. They're very, very, very strong. And some of those bubble beasties that I mentioned before, like Agito with the shark, it goes really well with the character and how the character is designed, as well as how the character ends up playing in the game. And same thing with Penny and their abilities and how the character, like, you know, having a penguin, having them like slide around. And that's, I think when I played the penguin character, that's why I started getting those snowy feels. It says Melty's beastie is called Candy, but I think that it was like a unicorn, which again feels very on brand for like an ice cream owner and a very whimsical sweets kind of character. Oh yeah, with Ravebreaker, they also had their beastie was like a mole, the mole that like, you know, pops out from underground and everything. And again, all of the abilities that go with Ravebreaker, because they can go underground and like pop up as like one of their abilities. And they can also, they have like a little, what is effectively an ink mine in Splatoon. They can throw a mine and like the little mole will pop out and, you know, do a little bit of damage, get a lot of foam for your team. But it works super, super well for the character. So I really enjoyed that. One thing I will say with the characters, I don't really know where else I'd put this. I'm not really gonna have like an audio section. The voice lines for both the characters and the announcers and that little duck thing, they were a little cheesy. There were some like very corny, cheesy lines and stuff that I'm like, this is just part of how it is. I'm enjoying myself, you know, like it's just part of like, it brings good vibes. But some of the uncoolness that I'm talking about brings like very like awkward vibes. Like that duck, just weird voice lines, just because it wasn't like overly awful or anything, but it was enough for me where I typically don't care about these things. I did end up switching to the Japanese voice lines. Maybe if they redid some of the lines for some of the characters, it wouldn't be a problem. I wasn't having it. I wasn't for it. All right, so now I want to talk a little bit about the maps. When playing these two modes, I think that the standard 4v4, I think it's like timeless. I think they did it so well. I like that they brought in a couple of different maps. I hope that they continue to bring more maps. How will the actual mode itself functions? So both teams start with, you have 7 lives, and it effectively is like the light versus dark mode in Kid Icarus, if you know that. So both teams start out with 7 lives, and as you chill the enemy team and knock them out, when someone respawns back in, you lose one of those stocks or you lose one of those lives. And then once you go from 1 to 0, then the superstar will appear. And then that is like the transition from like the early game into the late game. The overall objective of the mode is to get those 7 knockouts, expose that superstar, but you knock them out and you win the match. It's balanced so well. It works so well. The early game happens relatively fast. Some games it was like less than a minute where all 7 of those happen, but a lot of times it would probably take like 2.5 minutes or so, 2 to 3 minutes to get to that late game, which I think feels really good, because that late game things start getting very strategic very fast. And that's where like the meat of this game mode is. It's not getting down to 7. You definitely have an advantage if you win that early game and you expose the enemy team superstar. But even if you lose out early on, as long as you play that late game properly with your star player, it's not as much of a hindrance as it may seem on the surface. There was a couple of games, there's one game in particular that I remember where we went down, I think we got 1 knockout. So we lost basically like 7-1 at the beginning. I ended up being the star player, fortunately, and I was able to play the end game very well, and we ended up winning at the end. So even though we were down super early, we still found a way to come back and win the game. Sometimes the game can snowball. Again, I'm not sure exactly how it's going to work for people that are really sweating and trying their hardest at the game. One thing where this differs from that light versus dark mode that I talked about in Kid Icarus, this game, there's some sort of merit-based system. They choose like your best player in order to be the star player, which is so well designed, and it's just, I gotta get into it, but yeah, they didn't really describe what makes the best player, but it has to be either like whoever gets the most knockouts or chills in the first part of the game, or it might be a combination of that and like the amount of foam that you put down and saves. Like there might be some sort of back-end calculation that's happening. If I didn't get the star player, it felt deserved. Like the person that got it over me like was popping off, like playing really well. However they determine the best player, whatever the calculation was is a very good system, and it felt very accurate. That star player, I don't know all of the specifics, but they have like 3 times the HP of a normal character that isn't the star player, 3 or 4 times the HP. They also have like 3 or 4 times the amount of liquid. The reason why that's important is because the late game requires a lot of team coordination and a lot of like team fights in order to make it work. They have so much health that like one person can't defeat them by themselves. So a lot of times when I was going in trying to defeat the star player, I didn't go in with the purpose of getting the chill. I went in for the purpose of like doing damage and then backing out. And then, hopefully that I can get teammates in, and then we can like work together to defeat them and get their health down all the way. So it works super well and requires a lot of team effort. The reason why it works so well though is because you have so much agency in dictating how the late game goes if you feel like you're the best player in the lobby. Like we all have those feelings when we play competitive games, especially online, where it's like, oh man, my teammates were like the problem, or oh, my teammates, if I just had different teams, like I could have won this game for us. It's just like, if you truly are that way, this game gives you the tools as the star player to do that. So if you lose the early game and your team gets a star player before theirs and you lose all 7 stocks before them, you can be very liberal with taking fights as a star player if you can find 1v1s, because you'll always win them. You just have so much more health. You always win them. When I first became the star player in games, I was so scared that, oh man, if I go down, like we lose the game. So I'm going to play very passive and I got to hope my teammates protect me. But the more that you play, you can play very aggressive, get those picks, get their star player out. And then you start working with your team to figure out, how do we coordinate our specials? How do we coordinate our abilities? How do we build up foam in a way that gives us an advantage in these fights? And that part of it felt like there's so much strategy in there. It felt so rewarding. But I love that they choose the star player based off some sort of merit-based system. I feel like I have a lot more control over these matches than I would normally in other games that feel similar, or just other team-based games in general. The one caveat I will say, in this game, if you like jump off the sides, there's some water hazards in different parts of the map. If you fall in the water, you immediately get knocked out. Sometimes that felt very awkward. I don't hate that mechanic. It kind of reminds me of if anyone's played Soul Calibur, like the fighting game. Like certain characters can just like ring out the other character without having to like physically take down all of their health to get there. And it feels a little bit cheap. There were like 4 or 5 games where I was a star player and I fell off the map. But every time that I did that, I felt like I made a mistake. The only caveat to that is that Soa's special, which is effectively like a baller, but you're this unchillable spiky bubble. When I played Soa, I could intentionally try to get those ring outs and intentionally try to knock them into the water and in the game early. Because sometimes you could, if your team was like very clearly not the better team, it gave you a way out where it's like, oh, we can actually win the game if we can just get 7 down and I can like find a good opportunity. I knock them up once and then start moving them toward the side of the map. I can knock them into the water and still win the game. And so it's a give or take. I think generally it's fine, but it was something interesting to note. The other map in the 4v4 is called, I don't know if it has a name. I call it Casino, because it has a very Vegas feel. I think there's like poker chips. There's a lot of like gold coins and stuff on the sides. That map is a little bit smaller. It's not nearly as wide, with the other map being very flat and it's like a canvas for you to build on. This is there's a lot more structure to it. There's like 3 layers to it. It kind of reminds me, I'm gonna have so many references no one's gonna get. It reminds me of like Midship a little bit from the Halo series, if y'all played that. But if Midship was symmetrical on both sides and there was P3 on like both sides of the map. So there was like 3 layers to get to the tops, but the tops were very tall and then the bottoms were like a more bowl kind of shape, for lack of a better term. And on top of that, they had this like ball, like silver ball. I think it was supposed to be like one of like the roulette balls or something. But that would just like roll around the edges of the interior of the map. It sounds more confusing than it really is. And that would like clean up the foam, like a plow truck kind of thing in like snowstorms. That's constantly clearing up the roads, which is interesting. And like in the middle, they had like this top that would like pop into the sky and like fly to the top of the sky on that map. So there was a lot of interesting mechanics. There was little jump pads on the sides to get you from the floor all the way to the top. There's a lot going on. It works well, but it's kind of like these 2 different sides of the coin, where one is a very stationary map where it's kind of your job to fill in those gaps in order to build like an interesting map. And I think that works really well. And then like this casino is like very chaotic. There's a lot going on. It feels like a casino. Like it actually, it feels like I'm in Vegas. So there's so much happening around me. I think one of the coolest things about that map that really shows off, because there's a lot of unfoamable that are just like very rigid structures on the map. There's a lot of verticality on the casino map. And so what that allows you to do is build up these like giant foam structures, and you can jump from like floor 1 to floor 2 and then floor 2 to floor 3. So there's a lot of things that can get you into the air, and you can go from one floor of the map to the other in ways that you feel like you shouldn't be able to. And it feels really nice. Like it's designed for it. It's just is really cool because you start using your character's abilities in ways that you don't initially intend. You get to master these levels, master these abilities and the maps and everything. Everything just feels so well designed once you understand what they were trying to accomplish with a lot of this stuff. The other mode that they had, it felt like a little bit more of a party mode where they were just like kind of trying stuff out, but it was effectively a 2v2. Like it was a smaller map. I think there was only one of those maps. I could be wrong. I played the 4v4 mode way more than the 2v2. And so there's 2 people, like a 2v2 happening of people fighting in the middle. And then there's 2 people like basically like playing God almost. And they're on the outskirts of the map. And they have, they can foam the map, and they also are given a bomb and a wall kind of ability to be able to influence what's happening in that 2v2, which is like pretty creative. One problem I have with the outer people is that They all had this, regardless of which character you were, they all had the same main weapon and the same 2 abilities. It felt kind of samey, regardless of which character you played, because on the outside, everyone just functions the same way. I think I would have much preferred just a generic 2v2 without that intervention by the people in the upper area. Just like a smaller map, 2v2. I think that honestly, that could be like that 2v2 could have been more fun than the 4v4 mode. Because 2v2s are super fun, especially on like smaller maps. So I would love to see that, or at least have them try it out and see how it feels. Again, kind of final takeaways, this game's good, very good. And to summarize at the top, that this game beat the Splatoon allegations. I think it smashed the Splatoon allegations. It is its own unique game in a way that I did not expect. This dev team is definitely, they put a lot of time and effort and thought and care into this game, and I think they should be applauded for their efforts. I expected a lot rougher and rockier experience from someone taking that Splatoon turf-based formula as a shooter and kind of making it their own, but they did a phenomenal job. And they took the game in a direction I wasn't necessarily expecting, and it is just, I'm so excited. I am more excited now than I was when I initially watched the trailer, which was like kind of my peak excitement. I will be doing everything in my power to keep this game afloat. There's totally valid concerns and criticisms. You know, I don't know if this game's going to be free to play. I don't know if it's going to be a full packaged game. I don't know if there's going to be some sort of campaign with it, or if it's just multiplayer. I don't really know what their plans are, and I'm not sure if they've really announced anything or teased anything in that respect. But whatever they do with this game, I will be buying it for $70 if they have like a deluxe edition where I get some free skins and I can pay $100 or $120. Whatever they have, I'll pay $200 for a Soa statue, or a penguin with a little, I need a penguin on that statue though. You know, I will pay them whatever. I'm all in. I'm so excited for this game, and you know, I will be doing everything in my power as a content creator to continue to make content on this game. I am so excited. I want this game to have so much longevity. Splatoon needs competition. I still love Splatoon. I'm still playing Splatoon very regularly. I will be playing Splatoon and Foamstars simultaneously, but I think competition is great. Not only that, I just think Foamstars as a game is just so well done that I want this thing to succeed. I'm so passionate about kind of what they've done with this game and the decisions that they made about this game that I will sink with this ship. I am happy to play this game, and for however long that it exists, I will be doing as much lifting as I can to build a community around this game. Any thought or idea that I have with this game or prediction about this game, I will be making videos and content on this. So if you want to go along for the ride, definitely feel free to join our little boat, and we will enjoy ourselves. You know, I don't think that I'm going to convince anyone that doesn't like the game to like it all of a sudden. If someone may be interested in this game, or you know, some of the comparisons that I made to other games, if any of that sounds interesting to you, hopefully I've done enough to be able to convince you to at least give it a try. I'm so excited to see this game at its full potential. So take care, have a good one.